The first thing she said to me was a laugh. Not directed at something funny, not at a joke someone told across the diplomatic hall. It was aimed at me, at my uniform, my posture, the small patch of earth stitched above my left breast pocket, and it came out of her throat like she'd been waiting her whole life for something this easy to dismiss. I'd been warned about Princess Sarevith of the Keth Dominion. My commanding officer, Colonel Haynes, had pulled me aside in the briefing room 2 days before the summit of 12 realms and told me plainly, she is the worst kind of dangerous. Not because she's cruel, because she genuinely believes lesser beings don't notice when they're being looked down upon. I'd nodded. I'd said, "Understood, sir." I hadn't understood, not yet. My name is Sergeant First Class Darren Wool, and I want to be honest about who I was when I walked into that summit hall on Ketha Station. I was 29 years old. I had a scar along my left jaw from a piece of shrapnel I'd caught outside Kandahar 11 years before I ever heard the word Keth. I had 3 commendations for valor, 1 court-martial that was subsequently dismissed, and a record of 16 consecutive months in active conflict zones that my therapist back on Earth called the kind of thing that rewires a man whether he wants it to or not. I was not, by anyone's measure, impressive to look at. I'm 5'11" on a good day. I have brown hair that refuses to sit flat no matter what product gets applied to it, and I carry maybe 15 extra pounds around my middle that the Army tolerates because the rest of my numbers, endurance, reaction, marksmanship, decision speed under fire, sit comfortably in the top 2 percentile of active personnel. None of that shows when you're standing still in a dress uniform. I knew that. I'd known it my whole career. The people who judged you on stillness were the ones who'd never had to move. I walked into the summit of 12 realms as the human military attaché, one soldier among 36 delegates from 11 other starfaring civilizations. My job was to stand behind Ambassador Lian Fuang, look professional, and speak only when spoken to. Princess Sarevith of the Keth Dominion was spoken to constantly. She was the daughter of the 3rd sovereign architect, which in Keth political structure meant she was roughly equivalent to what you'd call a crown princess. Heir apparent, political heavyweight, and the face the Dominion presented whenever it wanted something done with a smile instead of a fleet. She was tall. Keth are always tall, averaging about 2.3 meters, with those elongated secondary limbs folded behind their backs in formal posture that always made them look like they were suppressing wings. Her coloring was deep violet gray, the skin catching the station light differently at different angles. 4 eyes, each a pale amber. A ridge of what looked like crystalline cartilage running from her brow to the back of her skull. She was, by the standards of anyone in that room, striking, commanding, the kind of figure that makes you understand instinctively why certain species developed hierarchies built around physical presence. She looked at me the way a cat looks at a piece of furniture it's decided to ignore. Then she laughed. It was soft, polished, designed to carry only to the ears she intended it to reach, which happened to include mine, because whoever had arranged the seating chart had placed the human delegation's standing position approximately 3 meters to her left. "The Terrans," she said to the delegate of Voss standing beside her, using the interstellar common trade tongue that everyone in the room shared, sent a single uniformed creature, not even a tall one. The Voss delegate, a squat, 6-limbed being with a reputation for measured neutrality, made a sound that might have been polite acknowledgement, or discomfort, hard to tell with Voss. "I was under the impression," Sarevith continued, smoothing the front of her formal coat with 2 fingers, "that Earth had been involved in some kind of prolonged territorial conflict. I expected something more, weathered." She let the last word fall like a stone into still water. I kept my eyes forward. My expression didn't move. Ambassador Fuang, standing directly in front of me, didn't react either. She'd heard it. Her shoulders stayed perfectly level. I'd worked with Lian Fuang for 14 months, and I knew that those level shoulders were the diplomatic equivalent of someone deciding not to draw their weapon. I was grateful for her. I was also quietly cataloging the hall, the exits, the positions of every security personnel present, the conversational groupings, who was talking to whom, which alliances were telegraphed by proximity, the way the Keth delegation had arranged themselves around Saravith in a loose constellation that maintained her visibility from every angle of the room. 11 years of active service teaches you that assessment is not aggression. You don't catalog because you plan to act. You catalog because not knowing is what gets people killed. I didn't plan to act on any of it. But I didn't stop looking either. The Summit of 12 Realms had been convened to negotiate the Corridor Accords, a framework for transit rights through the Seavith Passage, a stretch of interstellar lanes that crossed through the claimed territory of 4 different civilizations and sat adjacent to the unclaimed buffer zone that Earth's new colonial fleet depended on for resupply routing. For every other species in that room, the Accords were about commerce and political leverage. For Earth, they were about whether our expansion into the outer systems continued or stalled for a generation. Ambassador Fuang had spent 3 years preparing for this summit. I had spent those same 3 years in various places, where the prep was considerably less diplomatic and considerably more kinetic. We had arrived at Ketha Station through different paths and discovered, somewhat to both our surprises, that we worked well together. She thought in long arcs, I thought in immediate situations. She saw the shape of negotiations weeks out. I noticed when someone changed their posture. The first session of the summit began at the 9th standard hour. It lasted 4 hours and 14 minutes and was, from a forward progress standpoint, almost completely useless. What it was, however, was revealing. The Keth Dominion wanted primary control of corridor access fees. The Voss Compact wanted a joint administrative body. The Hellion Sovereignty, who technically held the oldest territorial claim on 2 of the 4 corridor-adjacent systems, wanted everyone to acknowledge that claim before any other discussion began. The Drekken Collective had sent a delegate whose primary instruction appeared to be agree with nobody. Earth wanted transit rights and resupply guarantees, and to not make enemies doing it. I stood behind Ambassador Fuang and watched. Princess Saravith argued beautifully. That's the honest word for it. She had a way of presenting the Keth position not as a demand, but as the obvious and reasonable conclusion that any sensible being should naturally reach. She acknowledged competing interests with a grace that made acknowledgement look like generosity. She deferred to the Hellion claim in language so artful that the Hellion delegate looked pleased rather than patronized. She was, in the language of the conference room, exceptional. She also glanced at me 3 times during the session. Not at Ambassador Fuang, at me. The first time was when the Drekken delegate made a pointed comment about species that had only recently achieved star travel, being poorly positioned to make demands about corridor priority. A gentle dig at Earth. Everyone in the room knew it. Ambassador Fuang responded with characteristic steadiness, noting that Earth's colonial trajectory had been accelerated by circumstance, and that our resupply interests were modest compared to the commercial volumes being discussed by other parties. Saravith glanced at me during that, a quick amber flicker, measuring, I thought, whether I'd react to the insult. I hadn't. The second time was when one of Fuang's junior aides, a young man named Connors who was on his first off-world posting and couldn't quite keep the tension out of his hands, dropped his data tablet. It clattered on the polished floor. Every head in the room turned. Connors went red. Saravith's gaze went to me, then to Connors, then back to me. Something in her expression shifted. I couldn't entirely read what it was. Amusement, recalibration. The third time was when the session broke for midday interval. She walked past me on her way to the refreshment alcove, close enough that I could hear the slight harmonic resonance the Keth carry in their voice structures even when they're not speaking. She stopped. "Sergeant," she said. The word in common trade carries rank acknowledgement. It wasn't dismissive, but the tone was evaluative, like a scientist identifying a specimen before deciding what to do with it. "Your Highness," I said. She tilted her head. The crystalline ridge caught the light. "You were in the Terran military conflicts." "The planetary ones." "Yes." "Multiple campaigns." "Several." "And now you serve as—" She gestured at me vaguely, in a way that encompassed my uniform and apparent function. "This." "Military attaché," I said. "Protection and protocol support for Ambassador Fuang." "A bodyguard," she said. There was a specific softness in how she said it, not contemptuous, exactly. More like the word itself was enough to convey her meaning. "Among other things," I said. She studied me for another moment. Then she moved on toward the refreshments without another word. I watched her go, because watching was my job, and noted that 2 of her personal guard detail had repositioned themselves subtly during our exchange to maintain line of sight to me. That told me something. Not what she thought of me, what she'd been told to be cautious of. Somewhere in Keth intelligence briefings, there was a file on humans, and something in that file had warranted a security adjustment during a 30-second conversation with a mid-grade sergeant at a diplomatic summit. I filed that away. The second day of the summit was when things began to move. The Hellion sovereignty announced, through their head delegate, an elderly being named Ithra who communicated through a kind of resonant hum, her translator, rendered as an extraordinarily formal tenor, that they would support the Voss proposal for joint administration, provided that the administrative body included representation from all 12 attending civilizations, not merely the 4 with territorial claims. This was significant. The Voss had not expected it. The Keth had not expected it. The ripple through the room was visible if you knew what to look for, a kind of recalibration, like a formation adjusting after an unexpected move. Ambassador Fuang had expected it. She told me at 600 that morning, over the lukewarm approximation of coffee that the station commissary produced, that she thought the Hellions would do exactly that. "They want to establish relevance," she'd said. "Their territorial claim is the oldest, but their actual power has been declining for 2 decades. If they can position themselves as the decisive vote on administrative structure, they preserve influence without picking a fight with the Keth." I'd said, "And where does that leave us?" She'd smiled. "In an interesting position, depending on how the Keth respond." The Keth responded poorly. Not visibly, Saravath was far too skilled for that. But in the negotiating intervals, in the body language of her secondary delegation members, in the way one of her advisors leaned too close to her ear during the break and received from Saravath a look that probably translated universally as "I know. I'm handling it, I could see it." The Keth had arrived at this summit expecting to control the structure of the outcome. They had not expected the Hellion move, and they were adjusting. That night, in the small quarters assigned to the Earth delegation on the station's diplomatic residential level, Ambassador Fuang and I sat across from each other at the narrow table and mapped what we knew. "The Keth want primary administrative control," Fuang said. "The Voss want joint control with a complex oversight structure that, practically speaking, they dominate because of their bureaucratic capacity. The Hellions just changed the game by proposing 12-party representation, which neither Keth nor Voss particularly want because it dilutes their leverage." "And the Drekken Collective," I said. "Waiting," she said. "They always wait. They want to see which direction the weight falls before they commit. Which means whoever gets the Drekken vote tips the balance." "Exactly." I was quiet for a moment, looking at the schematic she'd drawn on her data surface. "The Keth can't accept 12-party representation," I said. "No. It functionally eliminates their dominant position. So Sarevith has to find a way to reshape the Hellion proposal into something that looks like a concession, but functions as a restoration of Keth primacy." Fuang looked at me. "Yes. She'll do it through Earth," I said. The pause that followed was the kind that told me she'd already thought of it. "Walk me through your reasoning," she said. "We're the smallest party at the table, newest arrival. We don't have territorial claims, we don't have commercial interests that threaten Keth revenue, and we're the only delegation that hasn't explicitly aligned with any bloc. If she can bring Earth to support a modified Keth proposal, frame it as the reasonable compromise the young species found their way to, it signals flexibility to the Hellions without the Keth having to actually give anything up. It uses us as a credibility bridge." Fuang was quiet for a long moment. "That's a very specific read," she said finally. "She looked at me 3 times today," I said. "Not you, me. She's not trying to figure out what Earth wants. She's trying to figure out how to use the human soldier standing behind the ambassador." Another pause. "What do you want to do about it?" Fuang asked. "Let her," I said, "and charge an appropriate price." On the morning of the 3rd day, before the session resumed, Princess Sarevith's personal aide appeared at the door of the Earth delegation's quarters and requested, with exquisite politeness, that Sergeant Wool join the princess for a private consultation. Not the ambassador, the sergeant. Fuang had me wired with a full audio capture feed that would relay everything back to her suite. I followed the aide through the station corridors to a private meeting room that the Keth delegation had reserved. It was furnished with a low table and cushioned platforms calibrated for Keth proportions, which meant I sat slightly too low and she sat correctly, which was a small reminder of who had arranged this room. I noted it and moved on. Sarevith was already there when I arrived. She was without her usual constellation of aides, attended only by 2 security personnel who positioned themselves near the door. She was not in formal court dress. She wore something that read as working clothes for her rank, still fine, but without the architectural ceremony of her summit regalia. She looked for the first time like someone who was thinking rather than performing. "Sergeant Wool," she said, "sit." I sat. She regarded me across the low table for a moment. Then, "You've been watching everything." It wasn't a question. "That's my function," I said. "It's more than function," she said. "My security team flagged you on the first day, not because of anything you did, because of how you did nothing. The way you were still." She tilted her head. "The beings who are trained for danger hold themselves differently when they are not in it. You know what I mean." "I do," I said. "My guard captain described you as asterisk latent." She said the word like she was still deciding what it meant. "He's flagged latency in perhaps 4 beings in his career. The others were," she paused, "accomplished individuals." "I'm a sergeant," I said. "You keep saying that," she observed, as though the rank settles the question. I didn't answer. She leaned forward slightly. "I want to understand something. Earth's position at these talks is genuinely modest. You need transit access and resupply guarantees. You are not competing for administrative control. You have no territorial stake." She paused. And yet Ambassador Fuang navigated yesterday's session with a precision that suggested she knew the Hellion move was coming. "Ambassadors are skilled at pattern recognition," I said. "I'm also skilled at pattern recognition," Sarevith said. "And the pattern I am recognizing is that Earth is being very deliberately underestimated by every party in that room, including, I confess, myself initially." She held my gaze. "I would like to stop underestimating you." There was something different in her voice now, not the polished summit performance, something more direct. I held the eye contact, or the closest equivalent with 4 amber eyes, and said, "That would be appreciated." "Then I'll be direct," she said. "The Hellion proposal creates an administrative structure that neither the Keth Dominion nor the Voss Compact can function within without sacrificing our core interests. It will stall these negotiations for months, possibly years, during which time the Seventh Corridor remains in contested limbo. Earth's resupply routing is one of the casualties of that limbo." She paused. "We have a shared interest in resolution." "We do," I said. "I am prepared to propose a modified structure, 12-party advisory representation, as the Hellions want, but with a 5-member executive council holding actual administrative authority. Seat allocation on the council by a weighted formula." She let that land. "The formula would be negotiable." "The formula would need to include Earth," I said. "That was my expectation," she said. "And an Earth seat on the Executive Council means Earth's resupply routing becomes a council matter rather than a bilateral negotiation." Something moved in her expression, slight, almost imperceptible. "You followed that quickly," she said. "The corridor access structure affects our supply lines either way," I said. "Better to be inside the room than asking permission at the door." She studied me for a long, still moment. "Your ambassador," she said carefully. "She sent her bodyguard to this meeting." "She sent the person she trusts to read a room accurately," I said. "And what does that person read, right now in this room?" I looked at her, took my time. "Not as a power play. I've met people who use pauses as theater, and I wasn't interested in that. I took my time because the answer mattered, and I wanted to give her the true one. I read someone who arrived at this summit expecting it to be a performance," I said, "and is now deciding whether to make it a conversation instead." The silence that followed was not hostile. It was, if I had to name it, the silence of a recalculation. "Your file," she said slowly, "describes your service record in Earth's planetary conflicts as—" She seemed to be searching for the precise word from whatever her intelligence briefing had used. "Singular." "Files are written by people who weren't there," I said. "What would you say instead?" I thought about Kandahar. About the 14 months that had rewired me whether I wanted it to or not. About the men and women I'd served beside, most of whom were back on Earth now doing ordinary things, and a few of whom were in cemeteries. "I'd say I know what it costs to break something," I said, "which makes me careful about what I choose to break." The words hung between us. Saravith of the Keth Dominion, who had laughed when she first saw me across a diplomatic hall, was quiet for what felt like a long time. Then she said, softly, "The Drekken Collective will follow the Keth block if we secure the Hellion endorsement for the modified structure." "I know," I said. "Do you know how to secure the Hellion endorsement?" "Delegate Ithra wants her territorial claim formally acknowledged in the preamble language of whatever accord emerges," I said. "Not as a governing precedent, just as a matter of historical record. It costs no one anything, and it gives her something she can bring home." Another silence. "You've been busy," Saravith said. "That's my function," I said. And for the first time she smiled. It was a real one, not the polished summit smile, not the artifact of a performance. Something that happened in her face without being curated. "I laughed at you," she said, "when you entered the hall." "I know. I was wrong too." "You didn't know me," I said. "It's an easy mistake with people who are standing still." The third and fourth sessions of the Summit of 12 Realms produced the framework of what would eventually become the Seventh Corridor Administrative Accord. The modified structure that Saravith proposed, 12-party advisory representation with a 5-member executive council, was presented jointly by the Keth and Hellion delegations, which required a night of very careful preliminary diplomacy that Ambassador Fuang executed with the quiet precision that characterized everything she did. The Hellion preamble language was agreed upon by all parties in approximately 40 minutes, which was nearly a record for something that could have been an 8-hour argument. The Drekken Collective, true to pattern, waited until they could see the shape of consensus and then announced their support. The Voss Compact accepted the council structure with modifications to the weighting formula that gave them a fractionally stronger administrative position than the Keth had initially proposed, which Sarevith agreed to after a recess that lasted approximately 20 minutes. Earth received a standing seat on the Executive Council and resupply routing protections written into the foundational charter language. It was not everything Fuang had hoped for. It was more than she'd expected. That's the way these things tend to work. On the evening after the framework was initialed, the station hosted a formal dinner for all delegations. It was the kind of event where the political pressure has already been released, and what remains is the careful social work of making what just happened feel like friendship rather than negotiation. I stood at Ambassador Fuang's shoulder and watched the room do its work. Sarevith moved through the dinner with the same grace she brought to everything. I watched her work the Voss delegate, the Hellion elder, 3 or 4 secondary figures whose positions I'd catalogued over the 4 days. She was, as I'd understood from the beginning, exceptional at this. About an hour into the event, she crossed the room toward me. Not toward Fuang, toward me. I straightened slightly. "Sergeant Wohl," she said. "Your Highness." The accord language is stronger than I anticipated. She kept her voice below the ambient noise of the dinner. The resupply protections in particular. The drafting committee was convinced those were standard diplomatic language. "They are standard language," I said. "Standard language that happens to be unusually specific and unusually binding," she said. "Fuang is a very precise writer," I said. Something in Sarevith's expression moved, that almost smile again. "I've been at 7 diplomatic summits," she said. "I have never had a bodyguard explain the strategic architecture of a negotiating outcome to me." "I'm not really a bodyguard," I said. "No," she agreed, "you're not." She was quiet for a moment. "What are you, Sergeant?" I thought about that. The honest answer was complicated. I was a man who'd seen the inside of more conflicts than most people could imagine, and had come out the other side still capable of caring about the outcome. I was someone who'd learned that the most dangerous thing in a room isn't always the loudest one. I was, at this specific moment in time, a military attaché with a coffee stain on his dress uniform cuff that he was hoping the lighting was low enough to conceal. "Someone trying to do the job in front of him," I said. She looked at me for a long moment. "My guard captain," she said, "wants to know what branch of your military service specialized you in what he calls environmental dominance without kinetic expression." "Tell him the branch is called experience," I said. "And it doesn't have a sign-up process." She laughed, a real one, not the diamond-cut laugh from the first day, not the polished social instrument. Something genuine that moved through her the way laughter is supposed to move. "I mocked you," she said when it passed. "When you walked in, I said something unworthy. I heard. And you said nothing." "Saying something would have been the wrong move," I said. "Why?" "Because the right time to answer a dismissal isn't at the moment of dismissal," I said. "It's at every subsequent moment where you demonstrate it was wrong, which takes longer but tends to stick." She was quiet for a beat. "That is," she said carefully, "a remarkably patient approach." "Patience is cheaper than conflict," I said, "usually." "Usually," she agreed. There was a pause that wasn't uncomfortable. "The Keth intelligence file on your species," she said, "characterizes humans as emotionally volatile, tribally organized, and tactically unpredictable in high-pressure scenarios." "That's fair," I said. "It also notes," she continued, that in the 3 interstellar engagements where human military forces have been involved as secondary parties, all 3 opponents have formally requested ceasefire before the engagement reached what their own projections estimated as the halfway point. She paused. None of those opponents have provided a coherent explanation for why. That's a complicated thing to explain, I said. Try, she said. I thought about how to say it. When humans get pushed hard enough, I said, past a certain point, something changes in us. The calculation shifts. We stop asking, how do we survive this, and start asking, what can we afford to break to make this stop? And the answer to that second question is usually, I paused, more than the other side was prepared for. She was very still. 3 engagements, she said, 3 early ceasefires. We didn't ask for any of them, I said. The ambient noise of the dinner continued around us. Delegates from 12 civilizations, eating and talking and building the social infrastructure that holds agreements together. Sarevith looked at me for a long moment. You broke things, she said. When it was necessary, I said. We prefer when it isn't. And now you're at a negotiating table. Same preference, I said. Something shifted in her expression. It was a significant shift, the kind that happens when a well-built assumption encounters a fact that doesn't fit and has to reconfigure. I should apologize formally, she said, for the first day. Your Highness, you were working from what you knew, I said. So was I. That's how the first day works. And the second day? The second day I was watching your guard captain reposition to cover me, I said, which told me more than the laugh did. She was quiet. He repositioned because of a classified assessment, she said, one I hadn't read at that point. I know, I said. She looked at me with those 4 amber eyes, and I got the sense she was seeing me differently than she had 48 hours ago. Not with the surface recalibration of someone updating a first impression, but with the deeper adjustment of someone realizing the map they were using didn't match the territory. The Accord gives Earth more than anyone realized it needed, she said. It gives Earth what Earth needed, I said. We don't tend to ask for more than that. That may be the most strategic thing you've said. It's just true. Another pause. Around us, the dinner continued. Somewhere across the room, Ambassador Fuang was having what appeared to be a warm and entirely genuine conversation with the Drekken delegate, which knowing Fuang meant it was also precisely calculated. My audio relay was still running. She'd hear all of this. There's a follow-on working session, Sarevith said. Next cycle, on the specific language for the Council Charter. The Earth delegation is expected to attend. We'll be there, I said. I would, she paused, and the pause was different from the diplomatic ones. I would find it useful if you were present as well, not in a purely protective capacity. Fuang would have to authorize that formally, I said. I am aware, she said. I intend to request it through the appropriate channels. That's very formal. I am very formal, she said, when I am being genuine. I held that for a moment. Your Highness, I said, what does this look like on the Keth side? Asking for a human sergeant to be formally integrated into a charter working group. She considered the question. I respected that she actually considered it rather than dismissing it. It looks, she said, like the Keth Dominion recognizing that the Earth delegation contains people worth taking seriously. And does that cost you anything? Politically, some small thing, perhaps a comment or two from senior advisors. She straightened slightly. I have broken more costly things. The word asterisk, broken, hung between us for a moment. So have I said. And she smiled. The real one, the one that moved through her like laughter was supposed to move. You said earlier, she observed, that patience is cheaper than conflict, usually. Usually, I confirmed. What makes the exception? I thought about it. Really thought, not the quick surface answer, the actual one. When the thing you're being patient about is worth less than what's being taken from the people who can't afford to wait anymore, I said. When patience becomes cover for someone else's cruelty, that's when the calculation changes. She was still. And has it changed, she asked, for Earth? Not here, I said. Not today. Today everyone's trying to build something. That's the right kind of room to be in. She looked around the dinner hall. 12 civilizations, their delegates eating and talking, and yes, building something. Yes, she said, it is. The charter working session happened 6 weeks later, back on neutral ground at the Voss administrative hub of Koreth Station. I was listed on the Earth delegation roster as Strategic Protocol Consultant *, which was a title that Ambassador Fuang had created specifically for the occasion, and which she announced with a completely straight face she was extraordinarily good at maintaining. I sat at the actual table this time, not behind someone. Sarevith arrived with her delegation, and when she saw me seated, something moved through her expression that the rest of the room didn't catch. I caught it. She sat, the session convened. The Drekken representative opened with a procedural objection that occupied 45 minutes and ultimately changed nothing. Typical. Through the long technical hours of charter language, definitions, arbitration clauses, council rotation schedules, access fee structures, I watched and spoke when the speaking was right and was quiet when the quiet was right. Sarevith on 2 occasions built arguments that incorporated positions she'd heard me articulate in the preliminary sessions. Not attributed, just woven in. It was well done. On the 3rd day of the working session, during a recess, she found me in the corridor outside the conference room. No aides this time, just her. The fee arbitration language, she said, you changed it. I suggested a modification, I said, which will benefit Earth's resupply contractors specifically, which will benefit any party using the corridor for non-commercial purposes, I said. She looked at me. Yes, she agreed, it will. The language is broader. She was quiet. My counsel almost objected. I know, I said, they didn't. No, she said, they didn't. The corridor was quiet. On Koreth Station, the environmental systems ran slightly cooler than on Ketha, and there was a different quality to the recycled air. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. The 3 engagements, the early ceasefires, she held my gaze, were you in any of them? I was quiet for a moment. One, I said. She took that in. What was it like? She asked, not the tactical description. What it was like asterisk. I thought about the honest answer, about whether to give it. The honest answer was, it was like watching something in the people around me decide that the math had changed. Not anger. Anger was always there earlier. This was something else, something colder and more determined. The moment when the questions stopped and the actions started, and the actions were very thorough. What I said was, it was like watching people stop wondering if they could do it. Sarevith was quiet for a long moment. And after, she said, you came to a negotiating table. And before, I said, we'd much rather be here. She nodded slowly. The Dominion will ratify the charter, she said. I wanted you to know. Thank you. She paused. The pause, again, of someone being genuine rather than diplomatic. There is a position. Within the corridor administrative structure, a human representative would need to be nominated for the Council's security consultation body. The role requires someone with both diplomatic clearance and, she seemed to search for the word, field credibility. That's a decision for Ambassador Fuang, I said. I know, she said, but the nomination would have to be supported by another council party, a significant one. She held my gaze. That support exists if it's wanted. I held that for a moment. The shape of what she was offering was not complicated. A Keth-backed nomination for a human representative on a body that didn't exist 6 weeks ago. A role that would put someone from Earth inside the permanent architecture of the corridor accord. A seat at a different kind of table. "I'll tell the ambassador," I said. "Please do," she said. And another pause, this one different. Something in it that had nothing to do with the accord or the council or the nomination. "You said the right time to answer a dismissal is at every subsequent moment where you demonstrate it was wrong." I did say that. "You've done that," she said. "Thoroughly." I looked at her across the quiet Koreth station corridor. This Keth princess who had laughed when I walked into a room 6 weeks ago, who had sent her guard captain to reposition around me, who had read a classified file and changed her calculation, who had built arguments from things she'd heard me say, who was now offering a thing that cost her something politically, and she was doing it anyway. "You didn't have to do this," I said. "The nomination." "No," she agreed. "Then why?" She considered that seriously. "Because," she said, "when I made the wrong judgment, I made it publicly. Correcting it should also be public." She paused. "And because Earth is going to be relevant to these corridors for a very long time. The Keth Dominion would rather build that relationship now than discover too late that we should have." "That's the political answer," I said. She looked at me. "The other answer," she said, "is that you were worth taking seriously from the moment you walked in the room. I just didn't know it yet." I didn't say anything. "Is that sufficient?" she asked. "It's more than sufficient," I said. And that was true. The Seventh Corridor Administrative Accord was ratified by all 12 parties 14 weeks after the initial summit on Ketha Station. Ambassador Fuang attended the ratification ceremony. I stood behind her, or rather, slightly to her side now, in the position that had been formally redesignated on the diplomatic roster. Strategic Protocol Consultant, the title had stuck. Saravath of the Keth Dominion read the formal Keth ratification statement in the resonant, musical common trade that the Keth used for ceremonial occasions. It ran approximately 12 minutes. It was, as everything she did officially, beautiful. Near the end, there was a passage acknowledging the contributions of each party to the successful negotiation of the accord. Most of these were brief, formal, the diplomatic equivalent of a nod. The passage on the Earth delegation was longer. It noted, specifically, that the human team had brought to the summit a precision of observation and a patience of approach that proved essential to the framework's most difficult structural resolutions. It named Ambassador Fuang by title and service. It named, separately, the Strategic Protocol Consultant by name. Saravath did not look at me when she read it. But afterward, when the formal proceedings had moved to the reception, and the 12 parties were mingling in the careful warmth of conclusion, she crossed the room toward me directly. "Sergeant Wohl," she said. "Consultant Wohl now, apparently," I said. "That was a courtesy from the drafting committee," she said. "I may have had some input on the language." "I suspected," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Around us, 12 civilizations celebrated a thing that hadn't existed 6 months ago. "What happens next for you?" she asked. "After this?" "Back to Earth," I said. "Debriefings. After that, I expect I'll find out." "There are mechanisms," she said, "within the council structure for ongoing security consultation. The position requires intermittent travel to various member stations." "I'm aware," I said. "Including, periodically, to Ketha." I held her gaze. "Including Ketha," I agreed. She looked at me with the 4 amber eyes and the crystalline ridge catching the reception light, and I thought about the first moment I'd seen her, the laugh, the dismissal, the practiced disregard, and how far that moment was from this one. "You were never what I thought you were," she said. "No," I said. "That was my mistake," she said, "not yours." We started from where we started, I said. What matters is where we go from here. She was quiet for a moment. Where do you think we go? She asked. I looked around the room. The shapes of 12 civilizations doing the careful human, or rather, the careful being work of deciding to trust each other a little. Of building things instead of breaking them. Of choosing the longer, harder, more expensive patience over the shorter, cheaper conflict. Somewhere worth going, I said. And Sarevith of the Keth Dominion, who had once laughed when a human soldier walked into a room, smiled at me, the real one, the one that moved through her, and said, "Yes, I believe we do." I went back to Earth, did my debriefs. Sat across from 3 different intelligence officers who wanted to understand what had happened at Ketha Station and at Korath. I told them the truth, which was that a negotiation had succeeded because everyone in the room had eventually decided to take each other seriously. They asked me what changed. I told them, information. When you know what a thing actually is, you stop reacting to what you assumed it was. They wrote that down like it was more profound than it felt. I got 2 months at home, proper coffee, bed that didn't adjust to station gravity settings. My sister's kids, who had grown significantly and were fascinated by the small Keth diplomatic token Sarevith's office had forwarded to me, officially, through channels after the ratification. A piece of crystalline cartilage material, polished to clarity, with a Keth phrase etched on one face. My translator rendered it as, "What stands still is not always what is still." My niece asked what it meant. I told her it meant someone had figured something out. 6 months later, I was back on Korath Station for the first formal sitting of the Council Security Consultation Body. Sarevith was there, representing the Keth Dominion on the Oversight Commission. She said, "Consultant Wohl," when I walked in. I said, "Your Highness," and found my seat at the table. And we got to work. And word count, ~9, 800 words runtime, minutes at 160 WPM *. Channel Princess Queen Romance, HFY variant, Seed Film DNA, Secondary Education 2013. Underdog quietly appending a contemptuous hierarchy through demonstrated competence. Entry type, first person past tense mood arc. Dismissal right arrow assessment right arrow respect right arrow mutual recognition.